Welcome to Inside the Issues. My name is Amrit Singh. President Donald Trump has signed many executive orders since returning to the White House, more than 250 of them. But the one he signed today, if it survives legal challenge, could fundamentally change how millions of Californians vote in federal elections and how roughly 80% of ballots are cast in our state. Here's a look at what the order does. You get a sense that it requires DHS to compile a list of eligible voters and directs the USPS to take control of mail balloting. It also requires USPS to design some new envelopes with barcodes, and it directs the Attorney General to withhold funds to states that aren't complying. So federal funds become part of this conversation, and it is against a political backdrop of the president's, you can call it a vendetta against mail-in balloting and seeking to control elections to a new degree. The president's executive order is widely expected to be challenged in court, something the president mentioned while signing the order. Here's what he said.
And I don't know how it can be challenged. You'll probably challenge it. You may find a rogue judge. You get a lot of rogue judges, very bad people, very bad judges. But that's the only way that can be changed. And hopefully we'll win an appeal if it is. But I don't see how anybody can challenge it. I don't see how they can challenge it. And remember, it's about voter integrity. We want to have honest voting in our country, because if you don't have honest voting, you can't have really a nation, if you want to know the truth.
The president laying out his case for the executive order, at least rhetorically. You see here Gavin Newsom saying, we're challenging it, see you in court. So you get a sense of where California is on this. Much discussed about the mechanics and the politics. Let's bring in someone who knows California politics and so much more very well. It is Dr. Jack Pitney of Claremont McKenna College, someone we have on the show often. Dr. Pitney, great to see you. Thanks for being with us on a big night for executive orders, I should say.
Well, thank you.
We are looking at President Trump taking on mail-in voting in this new way. What's your sense of what we need to know about the mechanics of this executive order, or just the nuts and bolts?
Well, the mechanics of the executive order is simple. It can't work. One, the president is giving orders to the Postal Service, which doesn't report directly to him in the first place. It is a government corporation. The whole mechanics of setting up state citizenship lists, there's really no mechanism in place to do that. And the notion that you could develop such lists starting in April by election day is fanciful, not going to happen, even if there were no court challenge. The notion that these lists would be accurate, that people would be able to challenge it, again, this is something that's totally unworkable, and that's even before the legal challenges start.
Yeah, and on that point of legal challenges, inside the executive order, the president is citing Article 2, the executive's function of executing federal laws, presuming that these elections are the execution of federal laws, though these are state-run elections. What's the history of the federal government administering state-run elections?
That's right. He talks about Article 2, except Article 2 gives nothing to the president by way of elections. Mention of election is in Article 1. Congress has some limited authority over congressional elections, but the key part of the Constitution here is the 10th Amendment, which provides for federalism, which broadly defined gives states the primary power over elections. And that will be one of the several ways in which states are going to challenge this, and the states are going to win. This is not going to survive in court.
So then we think about this then potentially as a political gambit. I mean, President Trump, we should say for his part, says it's rogue judges who would be the ones that get in the way of this. He feels the Constitution is on his side. You've laid out the case that many Democrats and legal scholars have made, frankly, but the politics of it are interesting as well, right? Against this backdrop of a midterm election. Just take us into what the president's trying to accomplish and the way he's been talking about elections leading up to this election.
Well, sure. Anytime Trump loses, whether it's an election or years ago for the Emmys, he claims that it's rigged. There really is very little evidence of systematic vote fraud in American elections, even with mail ballots. But this executive order gives him a premise. It looks right now as Democrats are going to do very well in the midterm election, almost certainly going to win the House of Representatives. They have at least a chance of winning control of the Senate. And if that should happen, expect the day after the election, Trump to say, well, the election was obviously rigged. I tried to start it back in the spring, but the courts wouldn't let me. I'm sure that's what his lawyers are telling him. because they know the law. They know this is not going to stand up in court. So what he's doing is not so much changing the election structure of the United States, is giving himself an excuse for the Democratic victories that are likely to happen in November.
And there's been a lot of conversation about President Trump discouraging people to use mail-in balloting in the past, undermining the faith in mail-in balloting, and maybe that was an unintended consequence along the way in some of these previous elections for President Trump. Would you see any similar unintended consequences with respect to this executive order and the publicity around it?
Well, it may discourage some of his supporters from voting by mail. And that could end up hurting the Republicans because if a lot of Republicans don't vote by mail, something may happen. They may get distracted on election day. They might not be able to make it to the polls. They might get sick. So this has significant potential to backfire. A lot of the groups of voters who tend to support Donald Trump, particularly older people, are reliant on mail ballots. So in the end, this could end up being very bad political advice.
In our final moment, we've had this no excuse absentee voting by mail in California since 1978. What have we learned? What has the history of mail-in voting told us here in California?
Well, one of the reasons that the president objects to mail ballots is that in recent elections, they've tended to skew Democratic in a lot of places, but that wasn't always the case. Here in California in 1990, on election night, Democrat Arlo Smith was way ahead in the race for Attorney General. But when the mail ballots came in, they broke in favor of Dan Lundgren, who ended up winning that election by a narrow margin. Again, the composition of mail ballots changed over time. There's no reason to believe that had anything to do with shenanigans. It just had to do with the demographics of the California electorate.
Yeah, it's an invaluable perspective in history. We'll have to see what the president takes from this fight over this executive order, legal or political or otherwise. Dr. Pitney, always great to have you on. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Great to have Dr. Jack Pitney on a night like tonight. Much more come up here inside the Issues. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Tonight we go beyond the issue on the 2025 LA wildfires. Almost 15 months later now, and there's a lot of Palisades and Altadena homeowners who are still working with the rebuilding process, and frankly, they're struggling. Lawmakers in Sacramento are working on legislation to help. One of those lawmakers joining me now in studio. It is State Senator Ben Allen, Democrat, represents the 24th District, home to many Palisades fire victims, as I know you know well, and you've been a frequent voice and presence on this show having these conversations. Thanks so much for that, and it's great to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Where are we right now in this rebuild process? Because when we've had some of these conversations with folks, they say it's not just the permits, it's the underlying costs and it's insurance and our disputes.
Yeah. So it's a slow and painful process. I will say, you go up to the Palisades, you actually see a lot of homes that are being rebuilt. You also see a lot of empty lots that are still sitting there. You see folks like the poor folks in the mobile home parks, where there's been incredibly little progress. In some cases, not even clearances yet. And you're absolutely right. There's so many headwinds that people face. One of the massive headwinds, of course, has been just the underinsurance and just trying to get the insurance companies to pay people out so they can start getting back on their road to recovery.
One of the pieces of legislation that you've proposed to work with the insurance companies here, or at least prevent insurance companies from these non-renewals without notice, is SB 1301. Talk to the folks at home about what that would do.
Yeah. So this bill, one of the things we saw is that people were getting dropped even just a couple of weeks before the fires happened, which of course has created a raft of conspiracy theories, as you can imagine. Yeah. So one of the things we're asking to do with SB 1301 is to say, look, you got to give people 6 months notice before dropping them. And you should give some reasons as to why. Mm-hmm. So this would give people time to both find another carrier and also mitigate. If there's things that they can do personally to reduce their risk in a way that would make them a more attractive insurance candidate, then by all means. If it's some sort of broader infrastructural problem in the neighborhood and in the community, then they can go bring those concerns up to their city council members and put political pressure on the system to do the kind of risk mitigation that the insurance industry feels that it might be necessary. But in general, it's just not right to have them dropping people willy-nilly with very little time to go find somebody else without any reason.
Right.
We want there to be more time. We want there to be more transparency to protect people.
Something like 400,000 policies have been canceled since 2021. Is that right?
It's terrible, and basically everyone's now getting shoved off onto the FAIR plan, which is now tripled in size. It's totally undercapitalized. It's a bare bones insurance policy that really doesn't take care of people, and it's becoming a massive problem. And the FAIR plan was never structured to take on this kind of these numbers.
Yeah, it's a last resort situation, and it's buckling, to say the least. You talked about this bill helping some of those candidates for insurance or for maintain their insurance be more attractive. Insurance companies are saying, we want the state of California to be more attractive to our continued operation, and our ability to cancel some of these policies or our ability to navigate climate change in a way that we can't necessarily always predict is making it hard for us to continue to do business. And there's concerns, some say, inside the insurance industry that we're going to leave California on the back of things like SB 1301. What do you say to those folks?
This bill doesn't say that they can't drop people. It just says they got to give them a little more time, and we got to get down to the reasons why they're dropping people. And I'm hopeful that if we really start to focus the conversation on the risk issues, it can help push everybody to move toward greater risk reduction, from the insurance side to communities and fire departments, planners, but also individuals. And I actually have another bill that seeks to provide resources, a state-backed low-interest loan program, to help people harden their homes and make their homes less susceptible to fire risk.
Yeah, I mean, they say operational costs increase in the back of stuff like this, but you say that's a small pittance to pay, essentially, right? To do the kind of analysis, to
I mean, it kind of comes down to what, let's think about why is it that we care about keeping insurance here in the state? It's to make sure that people are able to live and grow and thrive and live with a certain amount of predictability. Again, this bill 1301 is not saying that they have to insure everybody. It's just saying you got to give people a reasonable amount of time before you just drop them, and hopefully give them some time that they can mitigate if there is some big risk that the company's worried about.
Yeah. Oh, well, listen, it's an interesting conversation, one I know you think about a lot for a lot of reasons, including the fact we should say you're a candidate for insurance commissioner. We won't talk about that tonight, but that's something that's coming down the pike for you. You've also worked on some of these tax incentives for Hollywood, for the film and TV tax credit, and this recent Wall Street Journal articles got the whole nation talking, some like 30% reduction in Hollywood jobs since 2022 in our area. Is it too little, too late? Because ultimately there's less stuff in production. A lot of stuff is going out of the state entirely. What more can we do?
Yeah. So first of all, the tax credit, we just passed it, half a year ago. We just greenlighted 135 new productions, TV, film productions that are going to be happening around the state, creating over $5 billion worth of economic activity. So this new expansion that we did is relatively recent.
Yeah.
We have seen a downtick in production globally, actually, because of a variety of broader economic trends. We knew that this tax credit expansion and extension was not a magic bullet, but we knew we had to do something substantive. And we are already seeing production coming back. But there's no question that this industry faces massive headwinds. It's why we had to do what we did with the extension and expansion of the tax credit, but we're going to have to go further to make sure that we can continue to do this incredibly important work that's such a big part of what makes LA so special. Yeah,
do you feel like it's existential? I mean, we're seeing these mega mergers, more reason, and AI creating just all these technologies that potentially put these jobs out. I mean, should we be thinking differently about the way we use some of our tax dollars, or do you feel like there's a chance really for this industry to come back in a major way?
I think for now this is a good approach. Again, I wish we could do a little more. We had headwinds. We were able to land this, so this is good. And again, there's already tens of thousands of jobs that are being kind of that are happening now as a result of this work. I serve on the Film Commission. We just greenlighted over 100 new productions that are going to be able to take advantage of this credit, and they're going to be happening right here in California. Most of them right here in Southern California. So I'm feeling good about that progress, but I'm not a Pollyanna. Right. I know there are these massive trends that are going to make that are making the future production murky, and there are academics that are looking at these questions and trying to figure out how we can keep our strong tradition of production going in this new era of AI and cost cutting. and I think over time we're gonna continue to tweak the model. But we really want to focus on job creation. This is not just about a blanket subsidy to industry. This is about making sure that people are able to work here. This has been a tentpole industry for Los Angeles for decades, for over a century. And it's about getting working people back to work in town.
Well, it was stay alive to 25. Now it's like, what can we fix in 26? We're seeing these reports of people that are just doing whatever they can to stay afloat between jobs. You got some green lights. That's promising, and much more to talk about with you. Thanks so much for coming in tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
As always, thank you so much. Stay Ben Allen. Big conversation about insurance, Hollywood, and so much more. More come up on ITI. We'll be right back. Thank you. California has a major housing crisis, we know this, but there's also an opportunity for some new solutions. City of Inglewood has a church which is stepping in to help, breaking ground on a new housing complex. You've heard about NIMBY and YIMBY. This is YIGBY, yes, in God's backyard. Chase Beach takes a look.
2, 3, now!
It's holy ground, or a holy ground breaking. Supervising pastor at Inglewood First United Methodist Church, Victor Cyrus Franklin, says they're breathing new life into an old, much-loved building.
This is just about serving people, all people, because that's what we believe God has called us to do.
For many years, that looked like this. Sunday services, luncheons, choir practice. Inglewood First was founded in 1905, and at its peak in the 50s and 60s, there were over 3,000 members. So the church bought up land to meet that demand. But today, there are just 65 regular congregants here. That decline in attendance mirrors what's been happening across the U.S. According to Gallup polling, in 1937, 73% of Americans said they were members of a church, synagogue, or mosque. By 2020, the numbers had dropped to 47%. It's left churches like this one with a lot of property, but not a lot of funds to look after it. Enter YIGBY, an acronym for Yes in God's Backyard, as opposed to NIMBYism for Not in My Backyard.
All of this will become apartments, also apartments above us, because this will become a second level here as well.
Soon, some of this church's property will look more like this.
This is the church living into its mission in a new day, in a new way.
The YIGBY movement calls on churches to turn houses of worship into low-income or affordable housing. It works in two ways. The church either sells or leases the land, so they receive a much-needed infusion of cash, and it aligns with a tenet of so many religions.
It's about how we can be a blessing to others, and others can join with us in being a blessing.
When these new apartments are built by a development company, they'll be next to the church sanctuary, but the residents don't have to have any affiliation with Inglewood First. Jessica Diaz has been a congregant here for 8 years and says many Christian churches, she feels, have been exclusive instead of inclusive.
The housing project, I hope, is like a redirection of like that history, and now like we're being responsive to the needs of the community rather than being this like exclusive place where only certain people can enter.
And the needs are vast. According to the California Housing Partnership, the state is short 1.3 million affordable rental homes or apartments. The housing shortage pushed legislators in Sacramento to pass Senate Bill 4 in 2023, the Affordable Housing on Faith Lands Act. It allows projects like this to go ahead with more ease. This one is expected to be completed in 2028. And Pastor Victor says he doesn't see this as a demolition of religion.
So it's really living into the mission that we have, where we're not internal, or we're focused on how we can reach out.
Reconstructing what faith can look like today.
All with new acronyms in the housing movement. That remains a big conversation in California. And now it's time for the conversation online. It's time for social issues. Our nightly look at social media posts from elected leaders and newsmakers where the needle is moving on that social media conversation. And one big one came today from President Trump and the White House account on Twitter, where he posted, quote, "I've just met with various political representatives of the tragedy that took place in California concerning the burning of thousands of once beautiful homes. Insurance companies, in particular State Farm, have been absolutely horrible to people that have been paying them large premiums for years, only to find that when tragedy struck, these horrendous companies were not there to help. It is a conversation around State Farm and insurance in California, one that we began having with State Senator Ben Allen a little earlier in the show, and we'll see where this one goes. But State Farm singled out for inclusion by the president there in that post. On the topic of Trump's executive orders on voting by mail, we have here Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. We should say a presidential hopeful for 2028, saying President Trump can sign whatever he wants to, but it won't change the Constitution. The authority to set our election rules belongs to the states. And as governor, I will protect your right to vote. That includes your right to vote by mail. He's speaking to Pennsylvania folks. That does echo what we heard from Professor Jack Pitney a bit earlier in the show. We also have here a post from the nonprofit center, the Brennan Center, which has been party to some of this litigation around election-related lawsuits and executive orders with the Trump administration. They wrote, breaking, the president signed an executive order on mail voting. He has no lawful authority to write the rules that govern our elections. He tried a year ago. We sued him. We won. A year later, he has tried again. He can expect the same result. So a preview of some of the litigation to come against, again, Dr. Pitney said that it's a non-starter from a mechanical standpoint, but from a constitutional standpoint, the Article 2 power invoked by the executive order doesn't stand muster because elections are written into Article 1 and is ultimately reserved to the states by the 10th Amendment. Also, let's take a look at this next one here from the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. And this is a tune-in information that actually the press secretary is offering to the United States public, and we can offer to you here on Spectrum News 1. Tune in tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern. That's 6 p.m. our time here in California. President Trump will give an address to the nation to provide an important update on Iran. We are now 5 weeks into this war effort, a fork in the road. Does the war escalate, or does President Trump end the war according to the timeline that he initially laid out? That is a conversation that we can expect some insight on tomorrow night when President Trump delivers that address. Right here on Inside the Issues, we'll have a conversation about that address directly after with experts, and of course much more coming up here on Spectrum News 1. Don't go anywhere. More news coming up right after the break. Well, you're taking a look at the Westwood campus of UCLA tonight, one of the institutions of higher learning, one of the places where they do a lot of consideration of what's happening in Southern California and in Los Angeles. And the UC system has been doing a lot of this conversation around affordability. And in fact, today the California Policy Lab at UC Berkeley released its findings from a survey of people who chose to move out of California. We've been talking about population decline. We'll get to those numbers in a second. But this survey, interesting for what it means for affordability and lifestyle conditions. The survey covered people who left or arrived in California over the past decade. That's millions of people. Findings are another data point in the discussion about affordability and housing in our state. Take a look at some of these numbers. A report found that people who moved out of the state saved about $700 in housing costs every month. They were also 48% more likely to own a home in their new state than they were in California. Researchers said the people leaving had higher debt than those who stayed, so you get a sense of the sample of folks that left. And when you look at metrics like credit card utilization, those metrics became clearer. The number of people leaving from higher income areas rose during the survey period, while the share of people leaving from low and middle income areas dropped. So it gives you a sense of the sorts of people that are leaving the state as well. And all of this, by the way, tracks with new data from the Census Bureau showing about 54,000 people left the LA metro area. That's LA County writ large, but it is the highest county of all those measured by the census. The second most was something like 12,000, and it was maybe in Florida. So there's a lot to discuss about what this means from a city standpoint. Joining me now is someone who thinks about this every day. It's Los Angeles City Councilmember Katie Yaroslavsky, who represents the city's 5th District, also the chair of the city's Budget and Finance Committee. You've got your mind all over this stuff, I know. Thanks for coming in and talk about it.
Thanks for having me.
When you hear population decline like that in the metro area, in the county, but obviously it impacts the city, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on here. I think the last time I was on here, we were staring down a $1 billion budget deficit. We're 1 year later, and so this is top of mind for me right now. You know, our budget as a city is only as strong as our local and regional economy, right? Because we're so dependent on revenue streams that really fluctuate with the vicissitudes of the local economy, right? So when people leave, that's not good. And I think there are a variety of reasons for that. But when it comes to the city's general fund and bottom line, it's something that that we're thinking about, and making sure that we're diversifying our revenue streams so that we're not so dependent on sales tax, property tax, things like that, and can get ourselves to a place where we have more stable revenues over time.
Yeah, people are consumers, people are workers, they generate revenue, generate taxes. I had this conversation with the CEO of the LA Economic Development Corporation, Stephen Chung. He has some interesting stuff to say about population decline. I want you to take a listen and we can talk about it.
Great.
Let's take a listen.
Industries and companies come to Los Angeles, even though sometimes we're a bit higher cost city to live in and work in. However, the talent pool is here. So if we have the population and we have the workers,
right,
the companies are willing to invest.
Right.
If we don't have that, if that continues to spiral, then basically we can't attract the companies that we want.
So that's a business standpoint, trying to make the area more hospitable to businesses and therefore to workers. What are the kinds of things that you feel LA City can do to help make it better for people, make people want to stay, increase population?
So I think that as a city, it's our job to really think about two questions that Angelinos are asking themselves. The first is, can I afford to live here? Mm-hmm. And the second is, do I want to live here? Right? And I think the city of LA plays a role in both of those. One, in terms of how we incentivize different types of housing production, how we work with our state partners to maybe change some laws up in Sacramento to incentivize people to build housing that's for sale and not just for rent, right? As we expand our housing supply, is it things that people can buy or is it things that people rent? So can people afford to stay here, right? And do they see themselves staying here? And then also, do they want to stay here, right? And a lot of that has to do with basic city services. Is it clean? Do people feel safe? Do they feel safe walking their kids to school? Do they enjoy living in the city, right? And so these are the two threshold questions that I think, as city leadership, we need to be asking ourselves. And right now, too many Angelinos are saying no to at least one of those questions.
Yeah, and another aspect of this, and you mentioned it, tied into affordability and wanting to stay, is housing. Is it available? You talked about working with state partners. The state has passed, Governor Newsom signs SB 79. There's some big questions around the implementation of it, though. LA City Council voted to functionally delay the full implementation and allow for the uprising of density around transit areas, which is what this bill does, but did it in a way that some people say the delay is a denial, and it kind of feels like a dodge as to the full extent of what's possible under SB 79. What do you say to those folks?
Look, SB 79 barely passed the legislature. I think it passed by one vote. And the reason it did get through was because it was negotiated to build in some flexibility. And municipal leadership, I think, has an obligation to try and implement this state law and mandate in a way that makes sense for our communities and that we maximize the benefits of it, because it's an opportunity too. And if we get it right, we'll see huge returns for Los Angeles. So what did we do? It's really a phased approach. We allowing now for the first time in these neighborhoods, single family neighborhoods, 3- and 4-story buildings, a dozen or more units where there used to be a single family house within proximity to metro stations. There are 55 of these that we've turned on right now. Like as of July 1, they'll turn on. And then we're also looking more thoughtfully at some of the places where the law allows us to take deferrals. So high fire severity zones. Does it make sense to upzone in the hillsides where maybe there's only one route out? Mm-hmm. Historic districts, right? Maybe it gives us time to come up with some guidelines to make sure that whatever gets built in historic districts comports with that. Lower income areas, right? Worrying about gentrification. What can we do to make sure that we don't see huge gentrification in these neighborhoods? Mm-hmm. And then also like details like right now, duplexes that are protected under the rent stabilization ordinance can be torn down under SB 79, and when something new comes up, those won't be rent stabilized units. So these are all things that we have time to work on to do a local alternative, which is allowed through the process, right, and decide together as a community where we want that density to go.
And this law passes in part because of negotiations that allow cities like Los Angeles to maneuver a bit, use a bit of a scalpel in some places instead of the sledgehammer. And our final moment, I mean, you're on the Metro board, this unanimous approval for the northern extension of the K line, which also has SB 79 implications. Talk about what it means for Los Angeles.
Look, this is a huge moment for Los Angeles on transit. Just the month before, we approved the Sepulveda Transit Corridor project, which is going to end up being the biggest transit project in our nation's history. And then 1 month later, we approve Crenshaw North Extension. So you'll be able to go from the airport from South LA up to job centers at UCLA, in Century City. Cedars-Sinai, which is one of the largest employers in the county, the 6th largest employer in the county, will now be connected with the rest of the region, which is incredibly important for patients, for workers, So it's a huge opportunity, and of course the housing should go near where people can and do take transit. And so the combination of approving this transit infrastructure as we're thinking about what density looks like along these corridors and stations is an incredible opportunity for us, and it's really important that we get it right.
And you know, there's going to always be people that say, why not just do the max that's available in SB 79? And in a sentence, you say, why not?
So we have a chance to go get state law changes so that will incentivize the people who build this to make it for ownership. Right? We should take that. Right? We have a chance to protect rent-stabilized duplexes through legislation. We should take that. We have a chance to come up with guidelines that protect historic districts, which are some of the most iconic neighborhoods in Los Angeles. We should take that. The law gives us this flexibility. You only get one chance to get it right.
Because
3 years is going to be here like that. And so why not try and do it in the best possible way that creates the typologies of housing that we want and need?
Yeah, it's going to be so interesting to watch how these next few years play out with respect to this. And I'm looking forward to having more of these conversations with you along the way. Thanks so much for coming in.
Me too. Thank you.
Really great to have you here. That is City Councilmember Katie Yaroslavsky, the chair of the Housing and Finance Committee there on the LA City Council, SB 79, and so much more. We've got more coming up on ITI. Stay with us. We'll be right back. President Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth continue to criticize NATO allies over the war in Iran. We also learned that Hegseth will testify before Congress next month for the first time since the war began. That hearing is set for April 29th in front of the House Armed Services Committee, and we expect President Trump to deliver an address on Iran tomorrow night. Taylor Poplars has the latest from Washington.
On day 32 of the war against Iran, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on Tuesday held his first press briefing in nearly 2 weeks. He insisted regime change has occurred and that peace talks are progressing, which Iran denies.
They are very real. They are ongoing. They're active and I think gaining strength.
But there's no indication the war is slowing down. Hegseth announced he made a secret trip to the Middle East last weekend to support U.S. service members there. President Donald Trump spent Tuesday morning venting about the lack of support from U.S. allies. He wrote, "You'll have to start learning how to fight for yourself. The USA won't be there to help you anymore, just like you weren't there for us." And he added, "The hard part is done. Go get your own oil." The war has put the UK, France, and other NATO nations on the spot. The president attacked Iran without consulting them, but he now wants their help to make the Strait of Hormuz safe. The vital shipping route for oil is mostly closed because of threats from Iran. The president Tuesday called out France by name, writing, "France has been very unhelpful with respect to the butcher of Iran, who has been successfully eliminated. The USA will remember."
You don't have much of an alliance if you have countries that are not willing to stand with you when you need them.
General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was asked about the president's threat to strike energy infrastructure in Iran, which could classify as a war crime against civilians. He said the military is always developing options to mitigate those risks. Reporting at the White House, Taylor Poplars, Spectrum News.
A federal judge in Washington, D.C. ordered to stop construction of President Trump's proposed ballroom at the White House. The opinion says the president lacked authority to replace sections of the White House without consulting Congress. A congressionally chartered nonprofit called the National Trust for Historic Preservation sued over the project after workers demolished the East Wing last year. The president responded on social media, calling them, quote, a radical left group of lunatics. President Trump also said the project is under budget and ahead of schedule. President Trump showed off plans for the building on Air Force One a few days ago. Watch this.
For 150 years, they've wanted to build a ballroom at the White House, and other presidents have wanted it. When we have dignitaries coming like President Xi of China or anybody else, we have very small rooms. They're not big enough to handle the kind of capacity that you need. This is the same height as the White House. It's an incredible fitting. You see what that is, right? Nice. I'll show you. Here's another view. This is coming from right opposite the Treasury building. Beautiful Capitol. Beautiful building, and one of the, I think it'll be the finest ballroom of its kind anywhere in the world.
Today's decision is a preliminary injunction, litigation ongoing. The judge gave the government 2 weeks to appeal. There was another court ruling against the Trump administration today. A separate federal judge in the District of Columbia said the president's order to strip federal funds from NPR and PBS violated the First Amendment. The organization that paid out those funds, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, later shut it down. Wednesday, the U.S. Supreme Court is set to hear arguments on whether President Donald Trump can end birthright citizenship. That's a principle that everyone born on U.S. soil is an American citizen, with a few narrow exceptions. Birthright citizenship has been enshrined in the 14th Amendment and upheld by the Supreme Court. Cassie Simeon has more on the politics and the legal arguments.
This next order on his first day back in office, President Donald Trump signed an executive order to end birthright citizenship, saying it would deter people from entering the U.S. illegally. The order never took effect after lower courts ruled it unconstitutional and put the order on hold until the Supreme Court weighed in. On Wednesday, the justices will hear oral arguments in the case.
The legal question is whether or not President Trump's executive order that seeks to, in my view, change our understanding of birthright citizenship, whether or not that complies with the 14th Amendment.
The 14th Amendment, which was ratified in 1868, has previously been interpreted by the Supreme Court to give citizenship to everyone born in the U.S., with the exception of children of foreign diplomats and enemy combatants. But the Trump administration and those who support their argument say those exceptions mean children born in the U.S. to parents here illegally should not be given citizenship. Ilhan Warman, who filed a brief in support of the Trump administration's position, says the argument here is different than the precedent set by the Supreme Court in the Wong Kim Ark decision in 1898.
The Wong Kim Ark decision from the 1890s applied to lawful domiciled residents. Wong Kim Ark's parents were lawfully present in the United States. They were domiciled in the United States. It is simply not true that the Supreme Court has ever decided the question here, which is children born to temporary visitors or those illegally present.
A number of the justices seemed skeptical of the Trump administration's argument to end birthright citizenship last year during a related case before the court. Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson said she believes the Trump administration's case will be met with resistance on Wednesday.
We have a majority of the court who are originalists, meaning they look at the original interpretation of the Constitution. What we have is a very good argument that birthright citizenship means what we've understood it to mean, certainly since the 14th Amendment was ratified, but also since the court made a decision back in 1898, which essentially said, you're born on U.S. soil, you are a U.S. citizen.
Oral arguments are scheduled to begin Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern, with a decision in the case expected by early summer. Outside the Supreme Court, Cassie Simeon, Spectrum News.
Thank you, Cassie Simeon. There are a few other major decisions expected from the Supreme Court this term. Take a look at some of the cases listed out here. Lisa Cook, member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, sued President Trump after he attempted to fire her last year. She hasn't been charged with a crime. She's citing a law saying the president can only fire members of the central bank for cause. This is one of the cases about independent agencies and executive oversight and presidential firings. A Democratic member of the Federal Trade Commission is sued over her termination. The FTC is an independent government regulator. The court is hearing a case over Louisiana's congressional map for the second time this term. That's about redistricting, and that's a challenge of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act while we're at it. There's also cases on campaign finance rules, a school ban on transgender athletes, and a challenge to gun restrictions on private land. The countdown to the Artemis II launch is on. We're going to have more on how NASA and the flight crew are preparing for that launch. The window opens tomorrow. You can watch the launch on Spectrum News 1, and more on it after the break. Stay with us. There may have been a sighting of Billy Joe Armstrong on Wall Street because it was a green day. Take a look at the Dow, over 1,000 points. NASDAQ and S&P 500 also up in major ways. Best day for the Dow in 10 months. All this on the back of some conversation about the Iran war possibly ending and the stock market cheering what that might mean. Of course, still some big conversations and questions about what happened with the Strait of Hormuz, and we'll talk about that in the days to come. Meanwhile, Californians are getting hit hard at the gas pump at the result of that strait being closed, essentially. Average price of regular gas at just under $6 as the war in Iran continues. That's in LA County. The national average is above $4 for the first time since 2022, up over $1 since the war began. All of this is having some big political implications. Evan Kosloff tells us more.
Over $4 a gallon. That's the big, scary number. That's the national average. But obviously, every state's different. So let's take a road trip of sorts to get a glimpse of what people are facing across the country. And our source here is AAA, which says the best prices are in places like Oklahoma and Kansas, where drivers are still paying under $3.30 a gallon. Here in Alabama, it's still not too bad, just under $3.70 a gallon. But head to places like Michigan or New York, and you'll start to see prices knocking on $4 a gallon. While it's already jumped above $4 in places like Florida and here in Washington, D.C., where drivers are definitely feeling the pain.
I'm really worried about the downstream impact that it's going to have on the economy. It doesn't seem like it's going to be dropping anytime soon.
But if you really want to talk high gas prices, just speak with a Californian, where the average for regular reached $5.88 a gallon on Tuesday. Meanwhile, prices are even higher for diesel fuel, hitting a national average of $5.45 on Tuesday. And this spike has really impacted businesses that rely on a fleet of vehicles, such as Mix Moving right here from Rockville, Maryland, where they've seen their fuel costs skyrocket over the last month.
These gas prices are going to take a hit to our budget.
Mick Wentz started this business 15 years ago out of the back of his pickup truck, and now has 11 trucks and up to 40 workers during the busy season.
This is one of our monster diesel tanks.
He says they're now paying up to $300 just to fill up one truck.
We're hoping this war will end soon, so that way prices will come down for us.
And it's not just truckers that rely on diesel. The fuel is also being used in everything from trains and buses to construction vehicles and tractors.
Diesel is very much the fuel that powers much of the U.S. and global economy.
And it's not just us drivers. Air travelers are also feeling it. That's because the price of jet fuel has more than doubled over the last month. Reporting here in Rockville, I'm Evan Kosloff, Spectrum News.
Destination Space presented by Florida's Space Coast.
The countdown clock is ticking and the final preparations are now underway. That's ahead of NASA's planned return to the moon tomorrow. You can imagine that the space shuttle launch runs on a tight schedule, of course. Greg Pallone, who we've come to know over the course of this Artemis II coverage, gives us a bit more about what to expect.
The excitement is building here at Kennedy Space Center. The countdown clock is ticking down to the scheduled launch time of 6:24 p.m. on Wednesday. The crew and the team, they start continuing to go over final checkouts to make sure the giant rocket is ready to blast off to the moon. All the rocket systems are powered up. The crew, Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Cook, and Jeremy Hansen, remain in quarantine inside the Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout Building after spending some time with their families Monday. As the countdown progresses, the team expects to begin fueling the rocket just after 7:30 a.m. tomorrow. It will take 5.5 hours. The crew will head to the launch pad at 2 p.m., if all goes well, to board the Orion capsule that will take them around the moon.
Flight crew will wake up at about 9:45 tomorrow morning. They'll have breakfast and start working towards their preparations for launch day. And getting their suits on and doing all the other work that they have to get ready to head out to the pad.
If the mission is a success, the crew in Orion will travel further into space than any other humans have. They will break the record set by Apollo 13. You'll remember they had an emergency on that mission, and NASA had to figure out a way to bring the crew safely back to Earth without them landing on the moon. They went 248,655 miles into space. Artemis II is set to travel 252,959 miles as it orbits the moon during the 10-day mission. Again, excitement here at Kennedy Space Center. At Kennedy Space Center, Greg Pallone, Spectrum News.
All right, Greg, we can feel your excitement, and maybe you're feeling excited at home as well. The window opens tomorrow, set to be 3 p.m. Make sure to join us right here on Spectrum News 1. The window continues all week, by the way. That's going to do it for this edition of Inside the Issues. Thanks so much for being with us. Thanks to Dr. Jack Pitney for talking a bit of politics, and of course to LA City Council members and state senators alike who are here on the show. Thanks for your trust and time.